I'm Professor Sky. This is the 10th class of my course entitled FCE 207, Haiti, the most important course, the most important country in the world. Let's just get to it. You don't need my whole preamble about it being a 200 level class and the fact that I know I'm not an expert on Haitian history and all that stuff. Please watch my other videos if you want to see that. Let's jump right into what the hell is going on in what's going on in 1794. What is going on in 1794 and 1795. Students and friends, I am Professor Sky. My name is perhaps known to you. I've undertaken to teach about Haiti. I want curiosity and a thirst for complex understanding to reign in this class. I'm working to help that happen. Unite yourselves, students, and learn with me for the same cause. That was the first thing. I do this at the beginning of every class. I'm paraphrasing Toussaint Louverture, so I had them for review explain what the importance was, what the meaning of that was. I also had my students talk about who the three different empires were that were fighting over this little plot of land on one side of Hispaniola. I got to say, my students didn't particularly know the answer, which is a little bit scary to me. So I've been repeating, so I'll repeat it to you because that's what I'll do. I'll treat you just like I treat my students, okay? The whites were aligned with the British because the British were going to bring back slavery and bring back white supremacy and push down anybody who wasn't white. So obviously, they'd rather them than the Republic. The former enslaved people were aligned with the Spanish because the Spanish guaranteed them freedom if they served with them, and it was most likely that they were going to be able to beat France over in Europe. The only people really affiliated with the French at this point Republic were the coloreds, because they thought the best chance of getting treated with equality, like saying equal to the whites, and the possibility of returning to slavery, all of the black inhabitants was most likely. So that's how they all divided. Which brings us to this state of play. Where were we in 1794? This is the beautiful map that I drew. It's not beautiful, but it's the map that I drew. I really suggest you all draw a map like this if you're following along. So we had basically these three forces with three different groups of people. We have Governor General Lavaux. So he's now Governor General. Before he was just a general. Now he's the governor general because Sotonax is off on a boat for 2 months going back to France. And he puts General Laveau in charge of the north. Down there in the south, we have Rigaud, the goldsmith, the colored leader, a huge figure in Haitian history, and he is given control over the south. But in between them and in the mountains, we have Toussaint, who had just switched from the Spaniards to the French. He just left his former mentor and person in charge, Jean-Francois. He left Biassou, and he is off doing his own thing, fighting with and for the French Republic. All right? On the other side of that border over there, you got Jean-Francois and Biassou who are working with the Spaniards who are in Santo Domingo, the other side of Hispaniola, who are hoping to take over this land and probably reinstate slavery. And then you got the British all over the place, just jumping in, sometimes helped by the whites, sometimes helped by the coloreds, trying to come in, trying to take over. Because as I said in the last class, if they get a hold of this piece of land, that will make them the richest, right? This is the richest space on planet Earth. It was worth more to France than all the United States of America were worth to England. Okay, that's how valuable this little piece of Massachusetts-sized land is. So they're trying to take over. That's the state of play in 1794. How is it going to change? Now, what I want to do now is I want to do a visual exploration of something that Mike effin Duncan went through. Okay, Mike Duncan's the guy who does the Revolutions podcast. That's the primary thing that I assign my students for this phase of the class. It's mostly reading in the second half, the post-revolution, but for the revolution, most of the work they do is through Mike Duncan, who's done a great job of synthesizing information, making it exciting, interesting, digestible, and well organized. And he came up with the idea, or at least I think he came up with the idea, of having five possible options for what might happen. What might happen now that the revolution isn't over? But we have this kind of stalemate. We've 3 years, a lot of the people are in place. So option number one is England. If England takes over, that's a huge win for them in the Caribbean. We will have a reinstallation of slavery, a return of discrimination against the coloreds by the whites. Another option, we have Rigaud. I put these in different order than Mike Duncan did. He was in charge of the South. He would be offering restricted liberty, which I will be discussing in 1 second. So don't you dare worry. We're going to talk a lot about restricted liberty. It's very important. The South, this whole time, had not been as ravaged by the uprising, by the insurrection. So a lot of the plantations were still working. The sugar was flowing a little bit. If you remember, going all the way back to the fourth, fifth class, it's all about the sugar has to keep flowing, and the sugar was flowing pretty well out of the South. Part of the reason why is that experts worked in Le Quai, which is down there, kind of in that southern area of the dingle dongle of Saint-Domingue. He leased plantations to people for a cut of profits. We will discuss that as well in a second. The main thing was he was pushing for and enforced colored superiority. It was possible because he had a lot of formerly enslaved black soldiers in his army. They could become they could rise up in the ranks, but they couldn't be the top ranks, right? They couldn't actually reach the top. They couldn't reach the real power. There was still an enforced sense of racial hierarchy. We have the Spanish option, where they would control the entire island. Maybe they'd bring back slavery, maybe not. It's unclear. I decided not to tell the example of Fort Dauphin, so we're just going to skip over that. And then the most interesting option is Toussaint's vision, where we'd have whites, blacks, and coloreds share the power, kind of tricolor harmony with this form of limited emancipation. So both Rigaud and Toussaint are both offering the same kind of limited emancipation. What might that mean? Well, a lot of it's based on the importance of the plantation system. And the whites could return, and many of them did, which meant we had a situation where former masters were the bosses of former enslaved people. All right, this is the kind of vision that he had, which we'll see. We'll see if it's able to work. And then there's this fifth version, this decentralized version, the counterplantation model, which I will explain in great detail in a second, based on Black liberty, just breaking up the plantations. Independent insurgent Black communities are all over the place at this point. I'm talking about like Jean-Francois and Biassou and Toussaint, but there's tons of generals, tons of leaders all over the place. Like maybe they want something different, you know? Maybe they want to be free men and women working for themselves. Why would they want that? Well, it's the question of the plantation model or the anti-plantation model. Now, listen, stop share for a second here. Part of when I taught this class, I wanted to include the work of Jean Casimir, who's a sociologist, Haitian sociologist. So I want to get into a whole sort of like mentality point. The same way a couple episodes ago, a couple classes ago, I talked about like what makes a leader, how mystical does a leader have to be, how much magic and reason, what's the proportion of a revolutionary leader? This is the more fundamental question of like, what will the future of Saint-Domingue be? What will the future of Haiti be? What can we ask of these people, the 500,000 people who were enslaved by the 30,000 whites and many of the 30,000 coloreds? What will their future be? That's the question. Let's hope this share works. Okay. So this is what you have to see. Before 1791, or hell, before 1793, before the abolition. But let's just say this is what it looked like. You know, you had somebody, we'll call him Black X. That's his name. I said that he was killed in a previous episode. He wasn't. He was fine. He was he got better. So there he is, right? When he's a slave, he's in the fields, he's cutting down the sugar cane, he's getting nicks and cuts on his hands, he's getting whipped, he's getting tortured if he steps out of line. He has very limited joy or peace in his life. He is in a constant state of aggravation, fear, terror, and pain. And now slavery is over. So who is he? And what is he going to do? And what are they going to do with all this land? So I have Paul Varel on there and I have Sonthonax, right? They were the commissioners who came from France. Sonthonax ended up being the person who declared abolition, which, as we know, was just reinforced by the revolutionary government in France. So abolition is a thing. There are no more slaves on Saint-Domingue. There are no more slaves in the entire French Empire. thanks to the efforts of people like this guy down here cutting the cornfields and cutting the sugarcane. So, what's fascinating is that a lot of the plantation owners were killed and a lot of them left. And most of those that left ended up supporting anybody who'd give them their power back. Many of them went against the revolution. Many of them wanted the old system back. Many of them went to England. They were all considered, this is all found in uh, Laurent Dubois' book, Earthquakes of History, Aftershocks of History. They all of their land was given to the state. So that meant all those plantations were all given to the state. Toussaint started to rebuild the ones that were burnt down. So all of that land, again, this is land that is more valuable than a gold mine. Haiti would have been less valuable if it was all gold mines instead of sugar plantations. That's how important sugar was. So when there was freedom granted, everybody on this slide said the same thing. Poverel, Sotonax, Rigaud, Toussaint, you have to keep the sugar flowing. You get to keep a quarter of the profits, but you have to keep the sugar flowing. And this just boils down to a basic question of economics. What does it mean that I go to work? I teach a bunch of 20-year-olds from a bunch of 18-year-olds from Western New York, all the stuff you're watching right now. I get a paycheck from the state. I cash that check. I use that. I buy food that I need. What does that mean that I'm in that system versus just growing the food in my backyard? And what if instead of getting to come here and teach, what if instead of that, I was having to cut down sugarcane? Okay. But like, how do you continue to exist as a place? How can you continue to exist? Well, this was the idea. Give them a quarter of their profits. Now, presto changeo, you are a cultivator. Congratulations. Black X, you have gone from slave to cultivator. Your life, you're going to wake up in the morning, you're going to cut sugar cane, and you are going to go to sleep. It's no different except you get to keep a quarter of the profits. So where's the other three quarters going? Well, another quarter goes to the state, just goes to France, of course. You got to pay your taxes. And then the other half goes to the leaseholder. And I asked my students, what was the leaseholder called in the olden days? And they all said the slave master. Now, it's not true, right? The leaseholder didn't like own the land. He worked the land for the state and it all kind of worked. But functionally, it's the same guy. It's somebody who is forcing these people to work. And who are these people? Well, it depended where they were. Toussaint Louverture would give the leases often to his generals, to the people who he knew and were loyal to him. Rigaud would give it to rich coloreds, would not give it to formerly enslaved people. It was still an unequal system where people got to choose who owned what. The people who were just cutting the cane, the people who were just cutting the cane were still not getting the benefits of their labor. And more than that, a lot of them wanted to leave. A lot of them didn't want to do this. They didn't want to cut sugarcane anymore. Thank you very much. I just fought in like 70 battles and saw all my friends die and killed a bunch of people so that I didn't have to cut any more goddamn sugarcane. So that meant that a lot of the generals in Toussaint's army at that point had to, as you can read on the screen, double as agricultural administrators, using the armed forces to police plantations and punish anyone who sought to run away from them, because people were running away into the woods like they were fugitive slaves, because it felt the same thing to them. Do you see the problem that we have here? Because Toussaint could not imagine Rigaud could not imagine anybody who understood economics and world trade could imagine this piece of land supporting 500,000 people, 600,000 people without trade, without sugar, without coffee. There's just no way to do that. That's too many people. Even all the way back then, it couldn't happen. So let's just go back in time. A little review for you. Were you paying attention when I talked about Le Code Noir that came out in 1685? I talked about, how the enslaved people got baptized, how they were treated as Catholic, which meant they didn't have to work on Sunday. Awesome. Very cool. There's some good stuff, a lot of bad stuff about how to torture them and how they're just furniture, right? The whole thing is ghoulish and terrible because it is providing some kind of reason will prevail facade to the monstrous, irrational terror of slavery. But there were parts of it that the enslaved people should have been able to use to defend themselves and protect themselves. Now, of course, this information rarely got to them. But one of those, and if you read French, you've already read it here, is Article number 22 of the Black Code, which I have translated into these simple words. Masters have to feed their slaves, have to give them food. 500,000 people have to get food. There's a lot of land here, so they had another idea. They could just farm for themselves and eat that food. The slave owners went directly against the Code Noir all the time, whenever it suited them. And this was one way. Instead of purchasing expensive provision, again, this is from Dubois' book, instead of purchasing expensive provisions, they allowed the slaves to farm scattered plots of land for themselves, or else work collectively on provision grounds for the whole plantation. A long time ago, I had my students say, hoo hoo, every time there's an unintended consequence, there's an unintended consequence coming up here. Hey, there's Laurent Dubois, the guy who wrote the book. Also wrote some awesome books about soccer. I have sort of an intellectual man crush on Laurent Dubois. The books that he's written, it's all about like the Haitian Revolution and the importance of soccer in France. Man, I got to meet this guy. Maybe I'll try to interview him on the channel. I won't mention the crush thing. I don't know if you get the joke. What they didn't consume themselves, they sold in local markets. That's also forbidden in the Code Noir, by the way. It's expressly forbidden for enslaved people, to grow their own food and sell it because they're afraid of this kind of thing. But whatever. These markets also provided a place for slaves from different plantations to meet and talk and connect and conspire. So that means a lot of the revolution probably was helped to coordinate. A lot of the revolutionary moments were probably coordinated by people who went in on that Sunday when they had the day off because of the Black Code and the food that they weren't supposed to be able to raise and they aren't supposed to be able to sell. Still, they go in and they meet and they sell. And also, if they make enough money, presumably they should be able to buy their own freedom. The garden plots were so productive, in fact, that by the late 18th century, they produced most of the food eaten in the colony by slaves and masters alike. From a tiny self-serving concession by the owners, the slaves had carved out a measure of autonomy. Over time, they came to consider the plots of land essentially theirs, because they essentially were. This one little lazy thing that the slave owners did, this one thing they did meant that the enslaved people had a sense of ownership, had a sense of pride, had a sense of normalcy, as much as you can have when you have no freedom, to be able to raise whatever they can raise and sell whatever they can sell and maybe even buy their own freedom. The correlation between autonomy and freedom and small farm plots is complete. It is a straight line. They're the same thing in the mind of these people who have been deprived of so much. This is important. Okay? This is important. So let's imagine you're the cultivator, not a slave, a cultivator, and you get 1/4 of that. Well, you don't want to do that anymore. Or I could just farm for my family and we could eat that food. I've been doing that anyways for the last couple hundred years. Of course, this was going to happen. In the long run, however, Haitian population's hunger for land ownership and autonomy meant that the plantation system was doomed. I'm going to go back to Jean Casimir. I quoted him in the second class. He said that the thing that Haiti does is Haiti disturbs. Part of the reason Haiti disturbs is because how much it has over centuries resisted the clarion call of global trade, the dream of globalization in trade, instead preferring self-sufficiency and autonomy. And it kind of all goes back to this because trade means slavery. That's what it meant to them. So, of course. So here's Jean Casimir. He released a book recently. I'm waiting for him to get in the mail. I think he also has one of the coolest faces on earth because the mustache matches the hair, matches the eyebrows. He's like one, two, he's like four arches. Anyways, this guy's a giant, right? He's a giant intellectual. Through their emphasis on self-sufficient agriculture, they built what Haitian sociologist Jean Casimir dubs a counter-plantation system, one based on a steadfast resistance to plantation labor in all its forms. And we are going to see the consequences of that. Is the world going to allow a bunch of freed people who've just freed themselves from the bondage of slavery to just live on their own and just be okay and just raise the food they can raise? Will this work? So throughout summer 95, Laveau helps to restrain the British so they can't go out. Jean-Francois's former lieutenant, his former number two, Toussaint, is able to have some victories against him and kind of push him back for a bit. The students become the master, right? Or the teacher. Laveau and Toussaint see this issue in Saint-Marc of the coloreds working with the British. This is all outlined in Mike Duncan's podcast. So first they warned the coloreds. They said, listen, come to the French side because the British are going to put slavery back, which I guess you want, but they won't let you be treated equally. There's no way they'll let you be treated equally to the whites. After he said you should come over, he threatened to attack them. He then came up with this whole complicated ruse where he told two people to go and talk to their leaders and say, hey, he was kidding when he defected to the French. He was actually trying to wait to defect to the British, and now he's going to do it. It's like, okay, good. Well, he can come talk to us. Well, at the same time, they recruited defectors within the town, and then they attacked, and all of the sleeper agents were activated, and they had and they lost. There weren't enough of them there. They weren't able to do it. And I tell that whole story because we're reaching a stalemate. Rigaud in the south took Léogane, which is really important because the British were trying to create sort of these kind of land connectors. You see Léogane down there. Port-au-Prince was protected by one of these random groups of slave armies that just kept the British from getting out of Port-au-Prince. The colors also used a lot of black armies, and this is what's really important. This is a point that's made, is that most often when we're talking about these wars, it's mostly black soldiers fighting against black soldiers, formerly enslaved people fighting on behalf of other formerly enslaved people. There's the huge issue of sometimes it's the black soldiers fighting for black generals, right? Like Toussaint. Sometimes it is black soldiers fighting for white soldiers, which is like, wait, why would you do that? Well, if you're paid and you're promised freedom, I don't know. Maybe it's better than feeling like that might feel like the best option for you and potentially for your family. And then you have black soldiers fighting for colored officers. Now, in America, in most parts of the world, we don't really understand the differentiation that there is between different shades of black and different parentage and all that. But as we've learned in this class, it is very important. Black is not colored and colored is not black. And there's this long history that the coloreds have of, oh, I don't know, wanting slavery, being slave owners. There's the whole story of the Swiss from a couple of classes ago where they told a bunch of enslaved people they would get their freedom if they helped to fight back the whites. And the whites help and the blacks fought alongside the coloreds and they won, and there was such a decisive victory that the whites ended up having a truce and gave the coloreds everything that they wanted, and then they didn't know what to do with the Swiss, which was the funny name for these black enslaved people, so they shipped them off to Jamaica. Then Britain discovered they were there and then sent them back to Cap Français, Cap Haïtien these days, and then they just died on a boat, just starved to death, or were shot on land. So these are all in the memory of all of the black soldiers, the formerly enslaved soldiers, that they cannot trust the coloreds, which is going to be a big thing in this class. I mentioned it now, but it's going to be a big thing. Also, Hyacinthe, he was one of the leaders who had that kind of mystical power. He'd walk around with an ox tail saying he couldn't be shot, he couldn't be killed. Well, he was killed. He was just caught in an ambush by some colored soldiers and killed. So there's a lot of mistrust between them all. But Toussaint always wants their alliance and wants their allegiance. And we're going to see throughout the next couple of weeks of this class, Toussaint and Rigaud are headed for something. So all this leads to the stalemate of 1795. Rigaud is able to contain the British. The others, some of the independent slave army is able to contain the British. Laveau is able to contain the British, and Toussaint is able to push back Jean-Francois, but they can kind of keep on coming back. We just basically have a stalemate, just like who's going to win. This is up until again. The whole story of this whole thing is it always gets changed because it's still a French colony. Meanwhile, back in the hexagon, for the love of God, am I going to have to show this slide again, this SpongeBob slide again? For the love of God. There's Robespierre, the person who was there when general abolition was put forth across all of France and its colonies. Robespierre was leading the government, and now his head's cut off. And we now have a conservative takeover of of France, of the Republic. And so, we're back in France, and almost everyone we've talked about who went back to France is in prison. The good news for all these people, right? So we're pretending those are lobbyists for the big whites, people who want the slavery to keep going and who are fighting against the coloreds and fighting against the slave insurrection. Galbo, you remember him from last class, he's the worst. Even Raymond is there, one of the founders of the Society of American Colonists, and they're all just sitting in jail. But they're not important enough to get their heads cut off, which is good for them. You want to be on the back burner. if possible. You just go, you know what? I'm going to wait for my trial because there might be a different government in the next week. Provorel and Sontonax arrive back in France and they're put on what Mike Duncan calls house arrest. Like they're prevented from moving anywhere, but they're not in prison. So what's going to happen? We have the Thermidorian Assembly, which is very conservative, wants things to be the way they were before the revolution. I mean, not entirely, but certainly not as revolutionary as all the people who just been in charge. And they are in charge of deciding the fate of Sontonax. Provorel is dead, R.I.P. They decide the fate of Sontonax and the fate of slavery in the colonies because the most revolutionary thing that the National Assembly had done in its entire existence, one could argue, okay, I guess maybe cutting the king's head off is a big one, but abolishing slavery is right up there. That's the main cash cow for the entire country. So the very conservative, the very conservative National Assembly now, the Thermidorian, they write a constitution and they have to decide what's going to happen to slavery. What are they going to do? Conservative? You think they're going to put slavery back? Nah. They let Sontonax go. Abolition is maintained. Sontonax is free to die peacefully. Brissot, one of the founders of the Society of the Friends of the Blacks, he's had his cut off, but Sontonax, he's able to die freely. Why? Why did they decide to do this? Because they changed tack, something which will end up hurting Saint-Domingue, Haiti later, anyways. Everything ends up going against them at a certain time. It's very sad. But they realized that they need to stop pretending like there's multiple Frances. There's just one France. And if there's no slavery in Europe, then there's no slavery there. There has to be a united, indivisible France. That's their concept. So slavery maintains its being abolished. Don't worry, all of you fans of slavery, I hope you're not watching this. There will be more attempts to reinstate slavery. Speaking of uniting things, France beats Spain in a war and they take over the entire island. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Talk about that the next class. That's the super exciting thing. If you are following along, the homework for my class now is to listen to episodes 10 and 11 of the Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan. I hope you found that all interesting, especially the stuff about the counterplantation model, because I believe it ties into deeper questions about the nature of capitalism and freedom. All right. I will see you all in my next class. There's the camera.